The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary is supposed to be a comforting scent. For most people, it brings back fond memories of warm Sunday evenings, laughter echoing off dining room walls, and the deep, reassuring feeling of belonging to a family. For me, that specific smell just makes my stomach tie itself into tight, painful knots. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that looked perfectly normal and domestic from the outside, when my entire life cracked wide open. We were all sitting around the heavy oak dining table. The clinking of silverware against porcelain felt unnaturally loud, echoing in the tense space between us. Vesper, my 24-year-old stepsister, was holding court as usual. She was practically vibrating with excitement as she described the new designer leather bag she had just bought on a whim. She was going on and on about the intricate stitching, the gold hardware, and the exclusive waitlist she had somehow bypassed, entirely oblivious to the heavy tension hanging in the air. I was 26 years old, physically and mentally exhausted from working a grueling 50-hour week at my corporate job, just trying to eat my food in peace. But peace was never an option in that house. Jareth, my stepdad, sat at the head of the table. He was a man who seemed to take up too much physical and emotional space, always brooding, always calculating his next move. He ran a small local hauling and freight company that was constantly on the very edge of going under, though he walked around the house acting like he was a titan of industry. Out of nowhere, right in the middle of Vesper's monologue, while I was taking a sip of my ice water, he set his heavy silver fork down. The metallic clatter made the room go dead silent. He leaned back in his creaking leather chair, crossed his thick, hairy arms over his chest, and locked his cold, judgmental eyes onto mine. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice in anger. He just looked at me with a sickening, pitying smile and sneered, "You will never be half as successful as your stepsister is." The words hung in the air like a physical blow to my jaw. A sudden, sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out the background noise of the refrigerator humming. It was not just an offhand insult, it was a verbal execution of my worth, delivered casually between bites of mashed potatoes. This was the man I had spent 16 agonizing years trying to impress. This was the man whose household I had been financially keeping afloat for the past 2 years. And there it was, the raw, unfiltered truth of how he truly viewed me. I was nothing. I was less than nothing. I was a miserable failure compared to a girl who worked barely 12 hours a week as a receptionist and spent the rest of her waking hours draining credit cards at the mall. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, beating so hard I thought it might crack my sternum. A burning wave of anger, the kind that starts deep in the marrow of your bones and makes your vision blur at the edges, washed over me. You would think I would have exploded right then and there. You would think I would have thrown my glass across the room. But I just sat frozen, because in that single agonizing second, my brain dragged me backward through time. I was suddenly wandering through the dusty, painful halls of my own personal museum of pain. I was 10 years old again, standing on the front porch of this very house with my worn-out suitcase clutched in my small, sweating hands. My biological dad had walked out on us years before, vanishing into thin air, and my mom, Leora, had quickly attached herself to Jareth to avoid being alone. I remember thinking a new dad meant a real family. I honestly thought it meant movie nights on the couch, someone to teach me how to ride a bike properly, and someone to protect me. Instead, I walked into a rigid, military-style regime where the rules constantly shifted, but only ever shifted against me. Vesper was 8 at the time. From day one, she was the undisputed golden child of the household. The sun rose and set on her every whim. I remember the layout of the house so clearly, down to the exact shade of the carpets. Vesper was given the massive master bedroom at the end of the hall, painted a soft, soothing lavender, filled with brand new toys, a sprawling canopy bed, and a walk-in closet. I was given the tiny, drafty guest room near the laundry area, where the walls were a depressing beige and the floor was always cold in the winter. But the physical space was nothing compared to the emotional divide that quickly became apparent. If Vesper left her toys scattered all over the living room floor, causing someone to trip and nearly fall, Leora would just smile softly, pat her on the head, and say she had a creative, sensitive soul that could not be boxed in by rules. Jareth would ruffle her hair, laugh deeply, and call her his little artist. But if I, the designated scapegoat, left a single, solitary glass of water on the kitchen counter after staying up late doing my homework, it was treated like a federal crime. I vividly remember being 12 years old, dragged out of my bed at 11 o'clock at night by Jareth. He stood over me in the dark kitchen, his shadow massive and terrifying, lecturing me for 30 exhausting minutes about responsibility, respect, and how I was a lazy burden who expected everyone else to clean up after me. As I grew older, the family drama only intensified. I figured out early on that the only way to survive the daily emotional grind was to keep my head down, stay quiet, and achieve everything I possibly could. I thought if I brought home perfect grades, they would have to love me. They would have to look at me and finally see my value. I remember the exact day I got the letter in the mail announcing I had won a full academic scholarship to a highly respected state university. I was 18, practically shaking with overwhelming joy. I ran into the kitchen, waving the thick envelope in the air. Leora barely looked up from her gossip magazine, muttering a quick, "That is nice, honey," before turning the page. Jareth took the letter from my hands, scanned it with a deep frown, and handed it back to me like it was trash. "Do not get a big head about it," he scoffed, turning his back on me. "Scholarships are just luck of the draw. It is a diversity quota thing. Besides, Vesper brought her science grade up to AC- today. That takes real effort and determination." That very night, they ordered a massive spread of expensive pizza and bought a customized bakery cake to celebrate Vesper's miraculous C-. I ate my dinner alone in my cramped room, staring at my full-ride scholarship letter, crying until my eyes were swollen shut and my throat ached. Every single milestone of my life was overshadowed, minimized, or outright mocked by that man. When I got my first decent-paying job out of college, Jareth told me it was a fluke and the company would likely downsize soon. When I bought my first used car with my own hard-earned money, he walked around it in the driveway, kicking the tires aggressively, pointing out every tiny invisible scratch, and loudly telling me I had been scammed by the dealer. He desperately needed me to be small. He needed me to fail so that Vesper's sheer mediocrity could shine brighter by comparison. I thought working harder would make them love me. But I didn't realize my success was just a mirror reflecting Jareth's failures. Sitting at that dinner table, staring at Jareth's smug, self-satisfied face, the painful memories of my youth faded away, leaving behind a cold, harsh, undeniable reality. I was 26 years old, and I was still living in this profoundly toxic environment. Why? Because the housing market was an absolute nightmare. Rent prices were skyrocketing, and I was trying to do the smart, responsible thing. I was aggressively saving every spare penny for a down payment on a house of my own. I wanted a place where the walls belonged to me, where the locks were mine, and where no one could walk in and tell me I was worthless. I had moved back in with them 2 years ago under the strict, verbal agreement that I would help out with the household expenses. Little did I know helping out would slowly morph into quietly funding their entire lifestyle while they treated me like the hired help. Let me break down the shocking numbers for you in vivid detail, because without understanding the math, the sheer audacity of my family does not truly make sense. Jareth loved to complain about the economy, about inflation, about how hard it was to keep a roof over our heads. He constantly played the role of the exhausted, self-sacrificing patriarch who was carrying the weight of the world on his broad shoulders. But the financial reality behind closed doors was vastly different. First, there was the internet situation. Jareth refused to pay for anything faster than the cheapest, most agonizingly slow dial-up era plan available from the local provider. But he loved streaming high-definition sports games, and Vesper was constantly downloading massive files for her video games and movies. The house was a constant chorus of complaints about buffering. So, to keep the peace and to be able to do my own remote work, I stepped up. I put the high-speed internet account entirely in my own name. That was $120 a month, automatically drafted from my checking account every single billing cycle. Then, there were the groceries. When I first moved back, I noticed the fridge was always barren by Wednesday evening. Leora would sigh heavily, open empty cabinets, and say things were just so incredibly tight this month with the business. Feeling deeply guilty, I started picking up a few things on my way home from work: milk, bread, some eggs. A few things quickly turned into massive weekly shopping trips. Soon, I was the sole provider of food in the house. And they did not eat cheap, budget-friendly meals. Jareth demanded thick-cut ribeye steaks, fresh salmon, and imported beers. Vesper claimed she had a highly sensitive stomach and could only consume organic, artisanal berries, gluten-free specialty bread, and expensive imported cheeses. If I bought regular store brand items, they would sit untouched until they rotted. I was spending an average of $850 a month just to keep the pantry stocked to their luxurious, demanding standards. And finally, there was the help. Every single month, on the first of the month without fail, I drove to the ATM, withdrew $500 in crisp cash, and handed it directly to my mother in the kitchen. It was supposed to be my fair contribution to the utility bills, the water, the electricity, and general upkeep. If you are doing the math along with me, that is $1,470 a month. I was 26 years old, paying nearly $1,500 every single month to live in my childhood bedroom, sleep on a creaky twin bed, and be treated like a parasitic burden. The ironic contrast of it all was enough to drive a sane person mad. While I was bleeding cash to keep the household running smoothly, the financial rules for Vesper were entirely different. Just 2 months prior to this dinner confrontation, Vesper had totaled her old sedan. She ran a red light while texting. It was undeniably her fault, but she came home sobbing, playing the terrified victim perfectly. Did Jareth tell her she needed to take the bus? Did he tell her to get a second job to pay for a cheap, reliable used car? No. Jareth and Leora drove down to the dealership the very next day and co-signed a massive loan for a brand new, shiny red sports coupe. I saw the dealership paperwork left carelessly on the kitchen island. The monthly payments were astronomical, carrying an insane interest rate. Meanwhile, my own spending was constantly policed and criticized. If I bought myself a new, professional sweater for a presentation at work, Jareth would eye me up and down, sneer, and make a snide comment about how nice it must be to have endless disposable income while he was slaving away to pay the mortgage. Once, I bought a bag of high-quality coffee beans for myself because I was working massive amounts of overtime and desperately needed the caffeine to stay awake. Leora actually pulled me aside in the hallway, looking deeply distressed, and whispered that I should really buy the cheap instant coffee powder instead. She said buying expensive coffee was flaunting my wealth, and it made Jareth feel bad about the family's tight budget. I had officially become the invisible wallet. My massive financial contributions were never acknowledged, never thanked, and certainly never respected. I was simply an ATM machine that they occasionally kicked when it did not dispense cash fast enough. Leora, my own mother, was the ultimate enabler in this twisted dynamic. She was not the one throwing the direct insults, but her calculated silence was a vicious weapon of its own. She preferred the false peace of submission over standing up for her own flesh and blood. Every time Jareth belittled me, she would look down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the texture of her food. Later, in private, she would tell me I needed to be more forgiving, that Jareth was just under a lot of stress from his hauling business, and that Vesper was just trying to find her way in the world. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and financial abuse. They took my hard-earned money, used it to fund the golden child's luxury lifestyle and Jareth's delusions of grandeur, and then had the sheer audacity to call me the freeloader at the dinner table. If you have ever been the invisible wallet in your own family, if you have ever poured your resources into a black hole of ungratefulness only to be told you are not doing enough, hit the like button. Because what happened next still makes my blood boil, and I guarantee you will want to hear how this pressure cooker finally exploded. Let us go back to that defining moment at the dinner table. Jareth's cruel words, "You will never be half as successful as your stepsister is," were still ringing in the stifling air of the dining room. For 16 years, my primary survival mechanism had been to swallow my pride, bite my tongue until it bled, and retreat to the safety of my room. I would usually excuse myself quietly, go lay on my bed, and cry into my pillow so they could not hear me breaking down. But not this time. Something inside my chest simply snapped. It was not a loud, explosive, screaming kind of break. It was a cold, silent, surgical fracture. The final, fraying thread of my patience severed entirely. I did not scream. I did not throw my plate across the room, even though every fiber of my being wanted to hurl it at his smug face. I slowly, deliberately placed my linen napkin on the table and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Vesper flinch. I stood up to my full height. I looked down at Jareth, meeting his arrogant gaze with a dead, hollow stare that held zero warmth and zero fear. "Great," I said. My voice was dangerously calm, so quiet and steady that they all had to lean in slightly to hear me. "Let her fund your lifestyle then. Because I am out." The table froze entirely. Vesper stopped chewing her bite of expensive steak, her jaw dropping slightly. Jareth's smug, mocking smile faltered, quickly replaced by a deep, dark, defensive scowl. But it was Leora whose reaction was the most infuriating of all. She blinked rapidly, her face twisting into a mask of pure, genuine confusion, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Merritt, what on earth do you mean?" Leora asked, her voice trembling slightly. She looked around the table, playing the innocent peacemaker to perfection. "You do not pay for anything here. We provide a roof over your head. We take care of you." I felt a cold, bitter laugh bubble up from the depths of my throat. I reached down and grabbed my heavy work tote bag that was resting against the leg of my chair. I unzipped the front pocket, the secure section where I obsessively kept all my financial records, receipts, and bank statements for my own personal budgeting. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of grocery store receipts, the latest printed internet bill, and the bank withdrawal slips for the cash I handed her every single month. I raised my hand and tossed the entire stack onto the center of the table. The papers fanned out dramatically, landing over the bowl of mashed potatoes and sliding against the gravy boat. "Let me clarify this for you, Mom, since you seem to have developed selective amnesia to protect your husband," I said, my voice rising slightly, cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. "That high-speed internet you use to stream your shows every night? $120 a month, paid entirely by me. The organic berries, the prime cut steaks, and the artisanal cheeses Vesper is currently stuffing into her face? $850 a month, paid by me with my debit card. The $500 in cash I hand to you on the first of every single month to help out with the lights and water? All me." I paused, letting my eyes dart between Leora's rapidly paling face and Jareth's hardening jaw. "That is $1,470 a month. That is what I pay to sit here and be insulted in my own home." Jareth slammed his massive, meaty fist onto the oak table. The silverware rattled violently against the porcelain plates. "Watch your tone with your mother," he bellowed, his face flushing a deep, angry mottled red. "You are an arrogant, ungrateful brat. We put up with you living here, taking up space in our home, and you think throwing a few groceries in the fridge makes you the head of the household. I think it makes me the only reason this household is not eating canned beans and instant ramen for dinner every night." I shot back, the years of suppressed anger finally bleeding into my voice, making it sharp and lethal. Vesper rolled her eyes dramatically, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms over her chest defensively. "Oh my God, Merritt, you are such a massive drama queen," she scoffed, her tone dripping with venomous condescension. "You make a decent salary at that boring desk job of yours. Why are you crying over some grocery bills? You should want to help your family out. You are so selfish. Normal people don't track every penny they spend on their family." Selfish. The word echoed in my mind, bouncing around my skull. I looked at the golden child, sitting there in a silk blouse that cost more than my weekly food budget, holding a designer bag, driving a sports car my mother was secretly paying for, sitting in a house powered by my money, calling me selfish. "You're right," I said softly, nodding my head slowly. "I am being selfish. And it is about damn time. Without another word to any of them, I turned my back to the dining table and walked straight into the living room. The wireless internet router sat on a small wooden side table, blinking with bright green lights, actively providing the connection Vesper needed for her phone. I reached behind the console, grabbed the thick black power cord, and yanked it violently from the wall outlet. The green lights died instantly. Then I quickly unscrewed the coaxial cable from the wall. I gathered the router and the tangled mess of cords into my arms. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Vesper shrieked from the dining room, her chair scraping violently as she scrambled to her feet. "I need the Wi-Fi. I have a show to watch and I'm talking to my friends." "The internet account is in my name," I said, looking over my shoulder at the three of them standing frozen in the dining room doorway, staring at me like I had lost my mind. "I pay for the service. I pay for the equipment. It leaves when I do. I suggest you use that new designer bag of yours to carry your laptop to the local coffee shop. Maybe Jareth can buy you a coffee since he is so successful." I turned and walked down the hallway to my tiny, cramped bedroom, shutting the door firmly behind me. I dropped the router onto my bed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely form a fist. My breathing was ragged, shallow gasps filling the quiet room. I had finally done it. I had drawn a massive line in the sand. I thought setting a firm boundary would finally make them think about what they were losing. I thought showing them the hard numbers and taking away their conveniences would force a moment of realization. Instead, it just made them incredibly dangerous. For the next 3 days, the house was an active war zone of intense passive aggression. The silence was heavy and suffocating, thick enough to cut with a knife. Leora avoided all eye contact with me, scurrying from room to room like a frightened mouse whenever she heard my footsteps. Jareth stomped around the house with heavy boots, intentionally slamming cabinet doors in the kitchen and muttering loudly under his breath about the sheer disrespect of the younger generation. Vesper threw multiple screaming tantrums about the lack of internet, burning through all her cellular data in a matter of hours and loudly demanding that Jareth fix the problem immediately. I ignored all of it. I went to work early, ate my cheap takeout meals alone in my room, and started aggressively looking for apartments on my lunch breaks. I knew my time living under this roof was rapidly coming to an end. It was a Saturday afternoon when the real nightmare, the ultimate betrayal, began. I had picked up a few extra hours of overtime at the office to pad my savings account before making a move. I pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon, physically exhausted but mentally determined to pack some boxes. I walked through the front door. The house was unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of the television or Vesper complaining. I headed straight down the hallway to my bedroom. The moment I turned the corner, my stomach plummeted straight to the floor. My bedroom door, which I always kept locked with a key I carried on my lanyard, was standing wide open. The cheap metal lock mechanism was bent and mangled, clearly forced open with a heavy tool. I rushed into the room, and the air left my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. It looked like a localized tornado had touched down directly over my life. My dresser drawers were pulled completely out of their tracks, my clothes thrown carelessly across the floor in massive piles. My mattress was shoved partially off the box spring, the sheets tangled. My small desk had been thoroughly ransacked, my personal papers and old notebooks scattered everywhere. But my eyes darted immediately to the back of my closet, to the small, hollowed-out space beneath a loose floorboard where I kept a locked, heavy-duty fireproof box. The box was sitting out in the open on the floor, the heavy latch pried open and broken. It was completely empty. Inside that box was a thick, sealed envelope containing exactly $4,500 in crisp, $100 bills. It was my immediate cash fund for an apartment security deposit, the first month's rent, and moving truck expenses. I had been saving it meticulously, dollar by painful dollar, from side hustles, selling old clothes, and working overtime. And it was gone. A wave of intense nausea washed over me. The room spun wildly. I felt like I was going to throw up right there on the carpet. I stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the door frame just to keep myself upright. My brain could not process the sheer magnitude of the violation. My own family. My own blood. They had robbed me. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, practically flying through the kitchen and bursting out the side door into the garage. Jareth was standing there, calmly wiping dark engine grease off his massive hands with an old, stained rag, standing proudly over Vesper's shiny red sports car. He looked up as I burst through the door, his expression completely blank, utterly devoid of any guilt, surprise, or shame. "Where is it?" I screamed, my voice raw and echoing loudly off the concrete walls of the garage. "Where is my money?" Jareth tossed the dirty rag casually onto a cluttered workbench. He reached down and picked up a heavy, solid steel wrench, turning it over slowly in his large hands. He looked at me with an icy, terrifying calmness that chilled me to the bone. "I do not know what you are talking about, you hysterical child. Keep your voice down. Do not lie to my face." I yelled, stepping closer, my fists clenched so tight my fingernails dug painfully into my palms, drawing tiny crescents of blood. "You broke into my room. You destroyed my lock. You stole $4,500 from me. Give it back right now, or I swear to God I will call the police." The door leading from the house clicked open, and Leora stepped out cautiously into the garage. She looked incredibly pale, her eyes darting nervously back and forth between my furious face and Jareth's menacing stance. She wrung her hands together tightly in front of her chest, a classic sign of her extreme anxiety. "Merritt, please lower your voice. The neighbors will hear you yelling," Leora whispered frantically, looking toward the open garage door. "I do not care about the damn neighbors, Mom. Your husband robbed me." I pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Jareth. Leora took a small step forward, looking down at the concrete ground instead of looking me in the eye. "It is not stealing, sweetie," she mumbled, her voice trembling and barely audible over the sound of my heavy breathing. We just borrowed it." The world seemed to stop spinning for a fraction of a second, freezing in time. I stared at my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a cold, dark void open up entirely in my chest, swallowing any remaining love I had for her. "You borrowed it? You broke my lock, tore apart my private sanctuary, and took my life savings without asking." Leora finally looked up, her eyes pleading for a sympathy and understanding I no longer possessed. Vesper's car payment was past due, she stammered, tears pooling in her eyes. She spent too much on her credit cards this month. The dealership was threatening to repossess the car. And Jareth's business had a really slow month. We had major bills to pay, Merritt. You are living here under our roof. It is only fair that you contribute to the family emergencies when we need it. I let out a sound that was half bitter laugh, half agonizing sob. The absolute, staggering delusion. The sickening, profound betrayal. She had actively chosen Vesper's luxury car over my desperately needed escape fund. She had stood by while her husband violated my room and stole the money I bled for. Here is the massive plot twist that they did not know, though. The joke, in a deeply twisted, satisfying way, was ultimately on them. That $4,500 was a huge amount of money, yes, but it was just my liquid cash emergency fund. My actual life savings, the bulk of the money I had been hoarding for 2 years for a house down payment, was sitting safely in an obscure, high-yield online savings account that Jareth didn't even know existed. But the financial loss was secondary at this exact moment. It was the principle. It was the profound, soul-crushing realization that, to them, I was merely a resource to be plundered. "You are a coward," I said to Leora, my voice dropping from a scream to a deadly, icy whisper. I did not yell anymore. The fiery anger had crystallized into pure, unbreakable ice. "And you," I turned my dead eyes to Jareth, "are a pathetic, failing thief who cannot even provide for his own wife without stealing from her daughter." Jareth took a threatening step toward me, raising the heavy wrench slightly. His eyes were completely black with uncontrollable rage. "You pack your bags and you get the hell out of my house right now," he snarled, saliva flying from his lips. "You walk out that door, and I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. I will ruin you." "You already did," I said softly. I turned my back on them, walked back into the house, and went straight to my trashed room. I grabbed a large canvas duffel bag and started shoving my most important clothes into it. I did not bother folding anything. I grabbed my laptop, my folder of important documents, and whatever toiletries I could carry in one trip. I was out of the house in exactly 15 minutes. I threw the heavy bag into the trunk of my car, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. As I backed rapidly out of the driveway, I saw Jareth standing on the front porch, glaring at me like a predator watching its prey escape into the woods. I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were stark white. I had walked out, but I had no idea just how far he was willing to go to ruin my life before the weekend was even over. I drove blindly for about 20 minutes, taking random turns through the city streets, before the adrenaline and shock started to wear off and the tears finally came. I pulled my car into a deserted grocery store parking lot, put it in park, and just sobbed uncontrollably over the steering wheel until my chest physically ached. When I finally pulled myself together and wiped my face, I picked up my phone and dialed the only person I knew in the entire world who would understand and wouldn't judge me. Cashin and I had been best friends since our freshman year of college. He was fiercely loyal, incredibly blunt, and had never liked my family or the way they treated me. When I called him and choked out what had just happened in that garage, he did not hesitate for a single second. "Get your car to my apartment right now," he demanded firmly. "The couch is yours for as long as you need. Just get here safe." Walking into Cashin's small, slightly messy apartment felt like stepping out of a freezing, violent blizzard into a warm, safe cabin. He immediately took my heavy bag from my shoulder, handed me a cold beer from the fridge, and sat me down on his comfortable sofa. I poured the entire story out to him, every single detail, every agonizing word exchanged, the broken lock, the empty box. He listened quietly, pacing the floor, his jaw clenching tighter and tighter with every sentence I spoke. "They are monsters, Merritt," Cashin said flatly, stopping his pacing to look me dead in the eye. "Absolute monsters. You cannot just let them get away with this. They crossed a massive legal line." Before we could form any kind of concrete plan, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an incoming call from Rylan, the quiet, elderly man who lived next door to my parents' house. Rylan mostly kept to himself, tending to his prize-winning rose bushes, but he had always been unusually kind to me. I answered the phone, confused as to why he would be calling me. "Merritt, honey, are you okay?" Rylan's raspy, gentle voice came through the speaker. "I saw you leave in quite a hurry, and you looked very upset." "I am okay, Rylan. I had to get out of there quickly." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "I feel I need to tell you something, dear, because it didn't sit right with my spirit," he said slowly. "I was out on my porch reading the Sunday paper earlier today. I saw your stepfather go around the side of the house with his heavy tools. And I saw your mother, Leora." Rylan sighed heavily, sounding deeply sad. She was standing at the front living room window, peering nervously through the blinds, keeping watch the entire time he was in your room. She knew exactly what he was doing, Merritt. She was guarding the door. The final, rusty nail was driven into the coffin of my mother's innocence. She wasn't just a weak bystander who couldn't stop him, she was the active lookout. She was an accomplice. I thanked Rylan, my voice entirely devoid of emotion, and hung up the phone. But the nightmare of that weekend was not over. By Monday morning, the flying monkeys had been formally dispatched by Jareth. My phone blew up with aggressive texts and guilt-tripping voicemails. The primary attacker was my Aunt Hestia, Leora's older sister. Hestia was the designated family gossip, a woman who thrived on drama and loved to pass harsh judgment on everyone else's lives. Her voicemail was dripping with toxic, manipulative guilt. "Merritt, I cannot believe how incredibly selfish and dramatic you are acting." Hestia's shrill voice played loudly through my phone speaker. "You made your poor mother cry hysterically all night. She is a total wreck. They generously took you in when you needed a place to stay, and you treat them like garbage over a little bit of borrowed money? Family helps family in times of need. You need to drive home right now, apologize to Jareth for your disrespect, and fix this terrible mess you created." I did not type a single word in reply. I blocked Hestia's number. I blocked Vesper's number. I even blocked Leora's number. I was officially done playing their twisted, abusive games. Then came the second, much more vicious blow. At around 10 in the morning, as I was sitting at Cashin's kitchen table drinking coffee, my phone rang again. It was a former coworker from my old job at a mid-level logistics firm. We were close work friends, so I picked up immediately. "Merritt, what the hell is going on?" she whispered frantically, clearly hiding in a quiet break room. "Your stepdad just called the front desk. He demanded to speak directly to the regional manager. He told them you were a known thief, that you stole thousands of dollars from your own family, and that you have been secretly taking office supplies and petty cash from the company. He tried to get you fired on the spot." My blood ran cold for exactly 2 seconds, and then a slow, dark, victorious smile crept across my face. Jareth was truly a vindictive, evil man. He wanted to destroy my livelihood, to ruin my professional reputation, to leave me destitute so I would be forced to crawl back to his house on my hands and knees, begging for a place to sleep. But Jareth was remarkably stupid. He was so wrapped up in his own massive ego and his obsession with Vesper that he paid zero attention to my actual life. He did not know that 2 weeks ago, I had handed in my formal 2 weeks' notice at that logistics company. He did not know that I had spent the last month secretly interviewing for a massive, high-level analyst position at one of the largest supply chain corporate firms in the entire state. And he certainly did not know that I had already accepted the offer, with a starting salary of $85,000 a year, a number that severely dwarfed the profits of a struggling, pathetic trucking business. His malicious sabotage had hit a solid brick wall. He had called my old boss to aggressively fire an employee who no longer worked there. I told Cashin what happened, explaining the sheer irony of the situation. He let out a loud, barking laugh that echoed in the small apartment. The idiot entirely played himself. Cashin cheered, slapping the table. But then his face grew serious, his eyes narrowing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, Merritt. You're angry, and you have every right in the world to be. But do not just scream at them. Do not just get mad and walk away. Make it clean. Make it hurt legally. You need to destroy his fake narrative with cold, hard facts." He was undeniably right. Screaming matches in the driveway would change absolutely nothing. I needed indisputable facts. I needed the undeniable power of paperwork. I opened my laptop and created a new, highly encrypted spreadsheet. I spent the next 12 hours straight digging through 2 years of digital bank statements, credit card histories, and archived email receipts. I documented every single utility bill paid, every grocery store transaction, every $500 cash withdrawal. I matched dates, highlighted amounts, and built a massive, undeniable paper trail of profound financial abuse. I compiled the evidence into a thick, organized PDF file. I was not just building a defense to protect myself, I was building a prosecution to destroy them. I even went online and scheduled a consultation with a local lawyer who specialized in small claims court. They thought they broke me. They thought taking my cash would leave me paralyzed, terrified, and helpless. They thought I was going to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and accepting my role as their permanent, silent scapegoat. They did not know I was just building a legal arsenal. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story so far. If you are hooked on this tale of family betrayal and are ready for the ultimate payback, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and let me know in the comments if you think I should have called the cops right then and there. Stick around, because the real karma is just getting started. The first few weeks after leaving that toxic house felt like waking up from a decade-long fever dream. Staying on Cashin's couch was not glamorous, but for the first time in 16 years, I woke up without a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. I did not have to brace myself for a morning lecture from Jareth or listen to Vesper complain about the brand of orange juice I had bought. The air in the apartment was light, quiet, and peaceful. I spent my evenings finalizing the paperwork for my small claims court case against Jareth and Leora, meticulously organizing every receipt and bank statement into a massive, undeniable binder of evidence. but my days were focused entirely on my new beginning. Starting my new position as a senior supply chain logistics analyst at the corporate firm was the ultimate breath of fresh air. The company was massive, spanning multiple floors of a sleek downtown high-rise, bustling with professionals who actually respected hard work. My new starting salary was exactly $85,000 a year, with a generous benefits package and a clear path for upward mobility. It was more money than Jareth had ever made in a single year from his struggling trucking business, a fact that brought a dark, satisfying smile to my face every time I looked at my offer letter. My new boss, Talia, was a force of nature. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense executive who commanded respect the second she walked into a room. Talia was fiercely fair, incredibly sharp, and possessed a deep hatred for inefficiency and corporate dishonesty. During my first week, she took me under her wing, impressed by my meticulous attention to detail and the organized spreadsheets I created to track our regional freight metrics. She did not care about family politics or emotional manipulation. She cared about results, facts, and competence. I thrived under her leadership. I was finally being recognized for my actual abilities, not punished for them. Meanwhile, through the local grapevine and the occasional unavoidable text from a mutual family friend, I heard exactly how things were deteriorating back at my childhood home. The financial strain of my sudden absence had hit them like a freight train. Without my monthly cash infusion and my endless grocery runs, their fragile house of cards was collapsing. Vesper's credit cards were entirely maxed out, and she was reportedly throwing massive, daily tantrums because Jareth refused to give her his credit card to buy a new dress for a party. The high-speed internet router I had taken with me had never been replaced because Jareth refused to pay the installation fee, leaving them relying on expensive cellular data that kept running out. The tension in that house was described to me as a ticking time bomb. They were turning on each other, tearing each other apart now that their designated punching bag was gone. Then, during my third week at the new job, fate handed me a gift so perfectly wrapped, it felt almost surreal. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing vendor contracts, when Talia called me into her spacious corner office. She gestured for me to sit down in the leather chair across from her sleek glass desk. "Merritt, I want your eyes on something," Talia said, sliding a thick, manila folder across the desk toward me. "We are expanding our local distribution network for the upcoming holiday quarter. We need to secure a reliable, local subcontractor to handle the overflow freight. It is a very lucrative account, a guaranteed $150,000 contract for the quarter, with the potential for a multi-year renewal if they perform well." I opened the folder, pulling out the stack of bids from various local trucking and hauling companies. Talia explained that they wanted a mid-sized local business, someone hungry for the work, but professional enough to represent our corporate standards. I nodded, flipping through the executive summaries of the bids. And then, my heart stopped dead in my chest. Right there, neatly printed on the third page, was the official company logo of Jareth's Hauling and Freight. I stared at the paper, reading his arrogant, exaggerated company description. He had submitted a massive bid for the $150,000 contract. This was the lifeline he was desperately grasping for. This was the exact contract that would save his failing business, pay off his mounting debts, and allow him to continue financing Vesper's luxury lifestyle while playing the role of the successful patriarch. He was banking his entire future on winning this specific corporate account. I looked up at Talia, keeping my face entirely neutral, masking the hurricane of vindictive adrenaline rushing through my veins. "I am putting together the evaluation committee for Friday morning," Talia continued, unaware of the internal earthquake happening across from her. "I want you in that meeting, Merritt. You know the local routes, and your analytical skills are exactly what I need to separate the genuine professionals from the desperate amateurs." "I would be honored, Talia," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I will review every single detail of these bids." I walked back to my desk clutching that folder, my hands practically trembling with the sheer weight of the power I had just been handed. Jareth had told me I would never be successful. He had stolen my savings and tried to destroy my career. And now, by pure, unadulterated cosmic irony, I was sitting on the corporate committee that held the power to either save his life or hand him his final financial ruin. Have you ever had karma fall perfectly into your lap? Subscribe if you want to see how I delivered it to him on a silver platter. The corporate evaluation meeting was scheduled for Friday. On Wednesday evening, I was sitting at Cashin's kitchen table, eating leftover pizza and reviewing the vendor proposals. I had spent hours dissecting Jareth's bid. It was exactly as sloppy and arrogant as he was. He had heavily padded his fuel estimates, included vague administrative surcharges, and failed to provide updated insurance compliance documents. In a fair, blind review, his proposal would have been tossed in the trash anyway. But I wanted to make sure it was buried 6 feet under. A sharp knock at the apartment door pulled me from my thoughts. Cashin was at the gym, so I walked over and looked through the peephole. My stomach immediately tightened. Standing in the hallway, clutching a large, foil-covered baking dish, was my mother, Leora. She looked terrible. Her usually perfectly styled hair was messy, and there were deep, dark circles under her eyes. She wore an old sweater I hadn't seen in years. The physical toll of the last few weeks was written all over her face. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. But another part of me, the cold, calculating part that had emerged since the day they robbed me, wanted to see exactly why she had tracked me down. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Leora offered a weak, trembling smile, holding the baking dish out like a shield. "Hi, Merritt," she said, her voice soft and fragile. "I brought your favorite. The 3-cheese lasagna." "How did you get this address, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, blocking the doorway so she could not step inside. "Aunt Hestia knew a friend of Cashin's," Leora mumbled, looking down at the welcome mat. "Please, sweetheart. Just let me come in for 5 minutes. It is freezing out in the hall." I stepped aside, letting her walk into the small living room. She set the heavy dish on the coffee table and stood awkwardly, wringing her hands together. She looked around the modest apartment, taking in the sparse furniture and the stack of legal documents resting on the kitchen island. "Things have been really hard at the house, Merritt," Leora started, skipping any genuine apology and diving straight into her victim routine. Her eyes welled up with practice tears. "Jareth is so stressed he can barely sleep. His blood pressure is through the roof. Vesper is struggling so much. They're threatening to repossess her car next week because we missed 2 payments. The grocery prices are astronomical, and without your help, we are drowning." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "It sounds like you need to tell Vesper to get a full-time job, and tell Jareth to learn how to manage a budget." "Why are you here, Mom?" Leora took a deep breath, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We made a mistake. We were desperate, and Jareth acted out of anger. But he is a good man, deep down. He provides for us. He is just facing a really tough quarter. If his business goes under, we could lose the house. We need you, Merritt. We are family." "You lost the right to use that word the second you stood by the window and watched him break my lock," I said coldly. She flinched as if I had physically struck her. I know," she sobbed, stepping forward. "But Jareth is bidding on a massive, life-changing corporate contract this week. If he gets it, all our problems are solved. He will pay you back every single penny he borrowed, with interest. I swear it. But right now, we need to keep the lights on. We need $2,000, Merritt. Just to bridge the gap until the contract comes through. Please." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity. They had stolen $4,500 from me, chased me out of the house, tried to get me fired, and now she was standing in my friend's apartment begging for another $2,000 based on the delusion of a pending contract. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up the thick, manila folder Talia had given me. I carried it back to the living room and tossed it onto the coffee table, right next to her foil-covered lasagna. The folder slid open slightly, revealing the bold corporate logo of my new employer. "A life-changing corporate contract," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "A massive local logistics expansion for the holiday quarter. $150,000 guaranteed." Leora's eyes widened, shifting from the folder to my face. How? How do you know the exact numbers? She asked, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. Because, Mom, Jareth is a remarkably stupid man who never bothered to ask what I actually do for a living, I said, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. When he called my old logistics firm to get me fired, I had already left. I was hired as a senior analyst at the corporate firm handling that exact expansion. That folder right there? Those are the vendor bids. Leora stared at the folder like it was a venomous snake. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking sickly pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I am the lead analyst on the evaluation committee, I continued, savoring the profound horror dawning in her eyes. My boss handed me those bids and asked for my professional recommendation. I am the person who decides if Jareth gets that life-saving contract, or if his pathetic company goes bankrupt. Merritt, no, Leora gasped, stepping backward. You wouldn't. You cannot ruin him. It will destroy our family. He ruined himself, I stated, picking up the folder and tapping it against my palm. He submitted a bloated, overpriced, sloppy bid because he thinks he can scam massive corporations the same way he scams his own family. You came here begging for $2,000, thinking he was going to save you. But the truth is, I hold his entire future in my hands. And I am going to crush it. Please, she begged, dropping to her knees on Cashin's rug, weeping openly now. I will do anything. I will pay you back myself. Just give him the contract. Show him some mercy. Did you show me mercy when I was crying in the driveway? I asked quietly. I walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open. Take your lasagna, Mom. And tell Jareth to start looking for a bankruptcy lawyer. Leora scrambled to her feet, grabbing the dish, sobbing hysterically as she ran out into the hallway. I slammed the door shut and locked the deadbolt. I let her run back to Jareth with the news. But I wasn't going to let him negotiate, and I certainly wasn't going to listen to his desperate excuses. I was going to annihilate him in that boardroom. The morning of the evaluation meeting, my phone screen lit up like a Christmas tree. From 6 in the morning until I walked into the corporate lobby at 8, Jareth called me 14 times. He left 6 voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. I could only imagine the frantic, panicked rage echoing in those messages. The power dynamic had shifted so violently and so suddenly that his tiny, dictatorial brain probably could not process the reality of his situation. I silenced my phone, slipped it into my blazer pocket, and walked into the elevator with my head held high. The corporate boardroom was a massive, intimidating space. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city skyline, and the long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting. Talia sat at the head of the table, flanked by the regional operations director and the lead financial controller. I took my seat near the center, placing my meticulously organized notes and the stack of vendor bids in front of me. All right, let's get into it, Talia said, opening her laptop. We have narrowed the local overflow freight bids down to the top 4 candidates. We need a reliable partner. Any delays in the holiday quarter will cost us millions in retail penalties. Merritt, you reviewed the financials and the route histories. Who are we looking at? We spent the first 30 minutes discussing the merits of 2 highly competent, professional firms. They had solid track records, but their pricing models were slightly above our projected budget. Then, Talia pulled up the 3rd file. Next is Jareth's hauling and freight, Talia said, adjusting her glasses. Their baseline bid is surprisingly low. Almost 20% lower than the market average for these specific routes. That is attractive for our bottom line, but I want to know if it is realistic. The operations director nodded. I agree. A low bid is great, but not if they cut corners on truck maintenance or driver hours. Merritt, you flagged this file extensively. What is your assessment? This was it. The moment of execution. I didn't smile. I didn't show an ounce of personal vindictiveness. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my voice calm, modulated, and ruthlessly professional. I was not a scorned stepdaughter in this room. I was a senior financial analyst protecting my company's assets. The baseline bid is a bait-and-switch tactic, I stated clearly, projecting my voice across the large table. If you turn to page 12 of his proposal, buried in the fine print of the administrative section, you will see a series of compounding, hidden surcharges. He has included a variable fuel adjustment rate that does not cap, meaning the moment gas prices fluctuate by even a fraction, our costs will skyrocket past the other vendors' flat rates. Talia frowned, flipping rapidly to page 12. I see it. That is incredibly deceptive. It gets worse, I continued, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet on the presentation monitor. I ran a compliance check on their operating history. They have a documented pattern of taking on contracts larger than their fleet capacity. To compensate, they frequently miss delivery windows or rely on unvetted, temporary day laborers to load the freight, leading to a high percentage of damaged goods. Furthermore, their primary liability insurance policy is set to expire in 3 weeks, and there is no letter of intent for renewal included in this packet. If one of their drivers causes a major accident while hauling our corporate freight, we could be held liable due to vendor negligence. The financial controller let out a low whistle. That is a massive legal liability. A low initial bid means nothing if we end up in court over a highway pileup. Exactly, I said smoothly. The proposal is sloppy, heavily padded with hidden fees, and demonstrates a fundamental lack of operational integrity. Hiring them would be a profound logistical error for this company. Talia closed the folder with a sharp, decisive snap. That is all I need to hear. Jareth's hauling is immediately disqualified from the process. Excellent investigative work, Merritt. You just saved us a massive headache. So, who do you recommend we go with? I smiled, a genuine, professional smile. I strongly recommend we award the contract to Sterling Logistics. Their bid is slightly higher, but they offer a flat rate guarantee, their fleet is entirely modern, and their safety record is flawless. They are dependable. What I did not mention to the boardroom, because it was not relevant to the corporate decision, was that Sterling Logistics was owned by Jareth's absolute biggest, most hated rival in the local trucking industry. They had been feuding for years over local territory. Giving the massive contract to Sterling was not just a rejection of Jareth, it was handing the ultimate victory to his sworn enemy. Talia nodded approvingly. I agree. Let's draft the acceptance letter for Sterling Logistics today. Meeting adjourned. I walked back to my desk, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. I sat down and finally pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a new voicemail, left just 10 minutes ago. I pressed play, pressing the phone to my ear. Merritt, pick up the damn phone. Jareth's voice roared through the speaker, sounding unhinged, out of breath, and desperate. Your mother told me you have the contract. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You are going to push my bid through. I demand respect. You owe me. You hear me? You owe me. The ink on the official rejection letter was barely dry. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end, leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, and got back to work. The fallout from the boardroom decision was swift and apocalyptic. When the formal rejection letter arrived at Jareth's struggling office, detailing the exact corporate reasons for the denial, the hidden fees, the lapsed insurance, the poor operational history, he realized that his final lifeline had been severed. That evening, my phone rang. It was Leora's number, but when I answered, it was Jareth's voice on the line. He wasn't yelling anymore. He sounded breathless, frantic, and cornered. I pressed the record button on my phone app, capturing every word for my legal files. You ruined us, Jareth hissed into the receiver, his voice shaking with a terrifying, venomous rage. You deliberately destroyed my company. You ruined this family, Merritt. I did not put hidden fees in your contract, Jareth, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I did not let your insurance lapse. I did not make your business a failure. I just presented the factual truth to my employer. You ruined yourself. I will sue you for defamation, he spat. I will drag you through the mud. You cannot sue someone for telling the documented truth, I said calmly. But speaking of court, I will see you on Tuesday morning at the municipal courthouse. Do not be late. I hung up the phone and blocked Leora's number again. The small claims court was located in a drab, gray municipal building downtown. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy blue suit I had bought with my first corporate paycheck. I carried my thick, perfectly organized binder of evidence. I sat on the wooden bench outside the designated courtroom, my posture straight, my breathing even. I felt no fear. I felt no anxiety. I only felt a cold, clinical determination. 10 minutes before the docket was called, the elevator doors opened. Jareth and Leora stepped out. The physical transformation in both of them was shocking. Jareth, the man who used to strut around the house like a terrifying giant, looked shrunken. He was wearing an ill-fitting, outdated gray suit that looked desperate. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. Leora looked like a ghost, clutching her cheap purse to her chest, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Vesper was notably absent, likely hiding in her bedroom to avoid facing any actual adult consequences. Jareth glared at me from across the hallway but did not approach. When the bailiff called our case, we walked into the small courtroom and stood before the judge's elevated bench. The judge was a stern, older woman with sharp eyes who looked like she had zero patience for nonsense. Case number 428. Merritt versus Jareth and Leora. The plaintiff is suing for the return of $4,500, alleging theft of personal property. Plaintiff, present your case. I stepped forward to the microphone. Your Honor, I resided in the defendant's home. I paid for the majority of the household expenses, including groceries and internet, totaling over $1,400 a month. I kept a locked fireproof box in my bedroom closet containing $4,500 in cash, saved for a rental deposit. On Saturday the 12th, while I was at work, the defendants broke my door lock, pried open the box, and removed the cash without my consent or knowledge. I handed my binder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Exhibit A contains photographs of the broken lock and the empty box. Exhibit B contains 2 years of bank statements and grocery receipts proving I consistently provided financial support, entirely negating their claim that I owed them back rent. Exhibit C is an audio recording of the defendant admitting he took the money because he was angry. The judge flipped through the binder, her eyebrows rising slightly as she reviewed the sheer volume of grocery receipts and the staggering monthly totals. She tapped her pen on the desk and looked down at Jareth. Defendant, do you deny forcing entry into a locked private room and taking this cash? The judge asked sharply. Jareth stepped up to his microphone, clearing his throat nervously. The arrogant sneer was entirely gone. Your Honor, she was living under my roof. She was eating my food, using my electricity. That money was just back rent she owed us. We are family. She was acting selfishly, hiding money while we were struggling to pay bills. I was simply collecting what was rightfully owed to the household. It was tough love. The judge leaned forward, her expression hardening into a glare. Sir, you do not get to unilaterally decide to break into a locked room and confiscate thousands of dollars in cash because you feel entitled to it. That is not tough love. That is called theft. Furthermore, the plaintiff's extensive documentation clearly shows she was contributing heavily to the financial upkeep of your household. She purchased the food. She paid the utilities. But she is my stepdaughter. Jareth protested, his voice rising in panic. I raised her. I provided for her for 16 years. She owed me for that. Children do not owe their parents a financial debt for being raised, the judge stated, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet courtroom. And adults do not have the right to rob their adult tenants. The law is incredibly clear on this matter. The judge did not even need to deliberate. She struck her wooden gavel against the sound block with a sharp, final crack. I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendants are hereby ordered to immediately return the full amount of $4,500. Additionally, the defendants will pay all court costs and filing fees associated with this case. If the payment is not rendered within 30 days, the court will authorize the garnishment of the defendant's business accounts. We are adjourned. Jareth's face went completely, shockingly white. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard his knuckles popped. The absolute authority he had wielded over me for 16 years had just been legally dismantled in less than 15 minutes by a judge who saw right through his pathetic facade. Leora buried her face in her hands and began to sob loudly, the sound echoing off the wood-paneled walls. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile or cheer. I simply packed my binder back into my briefcase, nodded respectfully to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom. Jareth had tried to teach me a lesson about being small, about knowing my place. Instead, the court had just formally declared exactly what he was, a petty thief. The court-ordered payment of $4,500 arrived in my bank account 28 days later, just before the deadline. Seeing that money land back in my possession was a profoundly surreal experience. It was not about the financial value anymore. I had already saved enough from my new corporate job to cover my expenses. That money represented a firm, undeniable line drawn in the sand. It was the physical manifestation of my victory and the final, closed chapter of my victimhood. A week later, I officially moved out of Cashin's apartment and signed the lease on a stunning, luxury high-rise apartment right in the heart of the downtown district. It had massive floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek hardwood floors, and a modern kitchen. Every single piece of furniture, every lamp, every plate in the cabinets belonged entirely to me. I had bought them with my own money, earned through my own hard work. No one could ever walk through my front door and tell me I was taking up their space. The peace I felt sitting on my velvet sofa, looking out over the city lights, was absolute and unbreakable. But karma, it seemed, was not quite finished with my former family. A few months after the court date, I was walking to a local, high-end coffee shop near my office building to grab a latte before a major presentation. As I walked up to the counter, I glanced at the employee operating the espresso machine. It was Vesper. The golden child was wearing a stained, dark green barista apron over a cheap black t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she was sweating profusely as a long line of angry, caffeinated customers shouted their complex orders at her. She looked exhausted, miserable, and utterly defeated. As she turned to hand a cup across the counter, our eyes met. Vesper froze. The steaming pitcher of milk trembled in her hand. She stared at my tailored designer suit, my leather briefcase, and the confident, relaxed posture I now carried naturally. She looked down at her own stained apron, her face flushing a deep, humiliating crimson. She quickly averted her eyes, turning her back to me to aggressively wipe down the counter, pretending she hadn't seen me at all. Later that same evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, so I answered it out of professional habit. "Merritt, please do not hang up," a small, broken voice whispered. It was Leora. She was calling from a burner phone or a public line because I still had her primary number blocked. "Make it quick," I said, leaning against my kitchen island, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. "I just wanted to hear your voice," Leora cried softly. "Things are so bad, Merritt. Jareth lost that big contract, and his business is basically bankrupt. He is so angry all the time. He yells constantly. And he is making Vesper pay the mortgage. He forced her to get a full-time job at a coffee shop and a second job waitressing on the weekends just to keep the house from going into foreclosure. He screams at her the same way he used to scream at you. He calls her lazy. He calls her a burden. It is awful." I listened to my mother weep for the fate of her precious golden child. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. Without me there to absorb Jareth's failures and fund their lifestyle, the toxic dynamic had simply shifted. Jareth needed a scapegoat to survive his own misery, and with his primary target gone, he had turned his venom on the only person left in the house. Vesper had officially inherited my old life. She was now the invisible wallet, the punching bag, the designated failure. "She wanted the golden child spot," I said coldly, feeling zero sympathy for a girl who had spent 16 years mocking my pain. "Congratulations to her. She finally gets to be the head of the household. Do not call me again, Leora. Have a nice life." I pressed end call and blocked the new number immediately. I set my phone down on the marble counter, walked over to the massive window, and looked out over the glowing city. The anger, the bitter resentment that had poisoned my blood for so many years, was finally, truly gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind a strong, unbreakable foundation. I thought back to that terrible Sunday dinner, to the vicious sneer on Jareth's face when he tried to crush my spirit. He had looked me dead in the eye and told me I would never be half as successful as my stepsister. I took a slow sip of my wine and smiled at my own reflection in the glass. Jareth was actually right about one thing. I did become incredibly successful. I became a highly respected executive, I achieved financial independence, and I built a life of absolute peace. I just didn't do it the way he wanted, and I didn't stick around to let him take the credit. I had won the war by simply walking off his battlefield and building my own empire. Some of my extended relatives still occasionally text me from new numbers, calling me cold-hearted. They say I went too far by destroying Jareth's corporate business contract, dragging my own parents into a courtroom, and refusing to forgive my mother when she begged for mercy. They say family is family, no matter what. So tell me, was I too harsh in my retaliation, or did they get exactly the karma they deserved after years of financial and emotional abuse? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of ultimate payback, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more drama. Thank you for watching.